Kathleen Gallagher at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education of the University of Toronto.
Urvashi Sahni from Study Hall Educational Foundation, Lucknow, India.
So, Urvashi, we're going to have hopefully an informal conversation. And I know you haven't had time to distill all of your thoughts and to really reflect on what has already been an extremely intense and powerful and interesting and challenging week. So I want to ask you at this point in time, as you're distilling lots of thoughts and ideas, what do you think will be some of the greatest learnings that you're going to take away from this week?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, first of all, for the week, which truly has been very intense and very, very stimulating and thought-provoking. For one, every time I'm always surprised at how little I know and how much more there is to know. I've learned a great deal from all the other collaborators, the different ways in which they approached their project, and the different kinds of techniques they used, the ways in which they interpreted verbatim, for example. Their contexts, of course, were very interesting and very complex in different ways from ours. And even the way in which we all approached our work, I think there's a lot to learn from that. In terms of in fact, in terms of distilling, what I've been doing is making slight notes to myself of things to do when I get back and things to take care of, and the different directions in which we can go to take back, right? So I was thinking of the ways in which the other contexts, I think it was Taiwan and Greece today, the way they did verbatim, where they got students to record each other's. In our case, it was much more individual, and though they recorded their parents, but even then. So that's something that I really want to explore, and this time with the girls and boys together, right? And in terms of oral histories, the other thought just struck me was that after listening to Wang from Taiwan, that what I thought would be interesting for us to do is get the girls to record the boys' oral histories about their sisters and their mothers and the things they've been through, and to try and together collaboratively then do something with that. So that's been an interesting... So many of the other projects have pushed my thoughts in different directions.
So you're the perfect person to zero in on some thinking about gender, because of course you so beautifully explained your vocation, how you came to want to put your learning to use, particularly for the most disenfranchised, lowest caste girls in your culture. And your thinking about gender keeps evolving. And I want to understand that this moment in time for you, how you're coming to think about gender. You're moving beyond your initial impulse and mission for girls. You're talking now about gender relations. We're talking about spectrums of gender and gender expression in different contexts. How are you now? How is your thinking about gender evolving?
For one, where it was really focused on girls working on themselves, right? And the idea was that you need to learn to resist, you need to learn to understand, you need to learn to push the boundaries of your own life, to establish yourself, to assert yourself, to affirm who you are, and make a personal change, almost like a personal revolution, which will then lead to a social revolution. I'm beginning to see that it has to be much more relational, that, and I'm beginning to see that, one, boys are pretty much caught in a gender war themselves, and they're pretty much victims of the same structure as well. They have less to lose, and their suffering is less than because they have more power. At the same time, unless there is a conversation between the two, I don't know that there is that much going forward. And in fact, that's the world you want. You want a world where there are people in easy and joyful dialogue with each other, right? So you want that. What I haven't done so far also is look at sexuality very closely, because it seemed like it was too risky and too dangerous to do it, and seemed to be like there were many more steps to take before you could get there. But what is happening is, in fact, that my girls are taking those steps. And so I realized that it was time that they sat and examined it and looked at it more carefully. Right? What we haven't yet dealt with at all is it's still a very binary way of looking at things in terms of girls and boys, and that seems to be like the burning issue, and that's the one that has come up in my experience and in the experience of the girls in my work with the girls too. But I think we need to go beyond that as well and start looking at a spectrum. That there are different ways of being a woman, there are different ways of being a man, and what are they? And I think as we begin to explore masculinities and femininities and the ideas of that is when that will emerge. And my methodology has always been emergent. That you look at what emerges and you deal with that, because I think that's most authentic, and in fact it's been responsive, responding to the needs that you can see, and actually responding to the issues that the students themselves seem to throw up or that seem most burning in their lives. And right now, it always has been, but it didn't seem like something we could grapple with.
Right.
I feel that there's no choice. You have to grapple. It's still risky, and it's still frightening, and I know it needs very careful treading. But at the same time, I think we need to deal with it.
So I've been leaning on you since we first met a long time ago in the context of collaborative research projects for your methodology of critical dialogues, which I think happen in lots of places in different ways. You often cite Freire, as many people do, inspirational on that level of the power of dialogue and dialogic possibility. What I'd love you to say something about is the relationship that you have found between critical dialogues and performance.
Oh, yes. In fact, right from the beginning, since I started doing the critical dialogues with my students, there's always been a very intimate relationship between the two. Not so much with performance, but with drama, right? And with performance, now that I look back on it. But we always used drama in the classroom as a way of illuminating definitions, arriving at better understandings, and at collaboratively grappling with an issue, with the body, with the mind, with the heart, and with our lives, so to speak, building them together. And a long time ago, I can't even remember, I think it must have been 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, which is when I started my work with the critical dialogues about 10 years ago. And 2 years later, the first time when we did a play, so we interspersed it with a lot of critical dialogue. So while we were taking other people's words, and this was a classic, Rani Lakshmi Bai, which many people have done, but the idea was to use that performance as another way of empowering the girls, as living another person's life, a very brave woman, and learning to build your own life strongly around it. So we would always pause during rehearsals and then discuss the issue, discuss the character, discuss possibilities, where was the person going and what would happen. And then we continued to do that. So now, after that, we did Bauki Chitti, which was, again, a classic by Rabindranath Tagore. And it's the story of a girl and how she grows into a woman and how she leaves her husband in 1914. And that was very powerful too, where these girls were totally concerned about now what's going to happen to her and what is she going to do with her lives. So it formed a very integral part of the performance. And then we slowly moved to girls writing their own, performing those, so that the critical dialogues was always a lead-in and very closely woven into the performance, because I think they both do similar things, right? The critical dialogue helps girls look at their lives, each other's lives, closely, reflecting on them. Though in that case, it's again there too. It's both using the rational and the emotional, because you can't talk about your lives without being emotional about them. But finding a voice, and again finding a way to deconstruct and reconstruct your lives. I think the performance too, whether it's your own words or others, distant others or closer others, it's still a way of finding a voice, giving your own voice, finding your own voice through these other people's words. And performance, again, because it's a representation of yourself. It's a presentation of yourself, and then a representation of yourself. That again is a very, very important way of constructing yourself, which is really important in the context where I come from, where women are not only not encouraged to have a self, they're positively discouraged from having a self or an identity, which might, if you have your own identity and a strong one, it might not fit in to the social role that you're expected to play.
Right. Can I ask you, because empowerment is such a contested idea in scholarship, in praxis, can you articulate how you use that term, what meaning you give to it?
Yeah. And I'm so glad I really think it's a very abused, much used and much misused term, and used variously, so nobody really knows what they're talking about. So we really tried to define it for ourselves so that we knew what we were talking about. We look at it as a way of, first of all, understanding that you're oppressed, then understanding the structural causes, the social and political causes that cause the oppression. Then finding a way, and that understanding leading to ways of overcoming the oppression. And then finding the skills that you need to, and finding your voice and your agency in the set of circumstances that you find yourself in.
That is a perfect description. Urvashi, thank you so much. As always, a rich conversation anytime we have the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Kathleen.
Thank you.